So as folks continue to straggle in, I am pleased, as always, to welcome you to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I'm Olga Oliker. I run the Russia and Eurasia program here at CSIS. And we have a terrific discussion for you today. I'm always thrilled to welcome Ruslan Pukhov. Ruslan runs CAST, a private for-profit think tank based in Moscow and focused on defense issues and the defense industry. And he and his co-founder of CAST, Konstantin Mikienko, have really built this organization up over the last couple of decades into what is truly a source for anyone who's interested in understanding what the Russian military is doing, where Russian defense industry is going, what the capabilities are. They publish some terrific publications, which Moscow Defense Brief and is the one that's in English. So if you want to contact me about that, and also Expert Вооружений in Russian. And you can find all of these on the website and subscribe. But Ruslan will be speaking today about what we can learn from Russian operations in Syria. And I'm also really thrilled that Michael Kaufman has agreed to be a discussant for this conversation. Michael is a fellow at the Kennan Institute of the Woodrow Wilson Center and also an analyst at Center for Naval Analyses Corporation. And he is one of our top experts on the Russian military. So we'll get a Russian view and we'll get an American view. And I see there are a lot of folks in the audience who are also very knowledgeable on these issues. Just kind of to lay some ground rules, Ruslan's gonna talk, then Mike's gonna talk a little bit, and then we're gonna open it up to all of you for questions. And I'm looking forward to a really good discussion. And just something I should have said at the start, in case of emergency, look to me. I will say anything that needs to be said. But let's turn this over to Ruslan, and we'll go from here.
Good morning to everybody. Thank you for coming. I would like, first of all, to express my gratitude to Center for Strategic International Studies and personally to Olga Oliker for giving me this excellent opportunity. I'm still a little bit relaxed. I just came late at night from Florida, where I spent 3 weeks vacations with my family. That's why I'm still not, like, when I came here, it was so busy, I felt myself like in Moscow, We at Sarasota, we are very, relaxed. But I think I would speed up due course of our presentation, and I think I would be much better in Q&A than in presentation. I prepared a formal PowerPoint, although it was in Russian, and I would ask Oля to forward it to those who are interested. And I think with the current capacities of Google Translate, even for those who are not proficient in Russian, they can see the basic points of my presentation. As for the full text, me and my colleague Mikhail Barabanov, we wish to develop it into a proper article and publish it in one of the upcoming issues of Journal for Slavic Military Studies. So if you are a proud subscriber of this, so David Glantz support us, we support David Glantz, you can read the full integral text. So the title of my presentation is Russia's Operation in Syria, Lessons Learned. In fact, I will briefly inform you about the operation itself and then about some consequences, mostly military technical, and a little bit political, which both Russian military establishment and political leadership draw from this. Some of these observations, they are already publicly known and were largely discussed. Some we draw at CAST ourselves. As an example that many people closely follow these events, I printed out a slide from presentation of International Institute of Strategic Studies, where the local folks elaborated a new title. They call it Calibrization of Russian Navy, of Russian Fleet. It means that the launch of Caliber's naval-based cruise missile was so successful that Russia is developing very much these capabilities. You know, I think it looks very obvious. So, returning to Syria, we all know that operation started on September 13th of 2015, but according to some indications, including how Russians was buying commercial cargo ships from open market, the idea to intervene in Syria and the concrete, tangible preparation, they started somewhere in March. I think the decision was taken, if not last minute, but probably at the end of August. Or even at the beginning of September of 2015. But the logistical preparations, they started well before. We all know that from the beginning, the limited number of Russian aircraft and support troops was deployed. 12 Su-24 bombers, 12 Su-25 monoplus and B-plus ground attackers, 4 newly built Su-30SM multifunctional aircraft, 1 aircraft of radioelectronic intelligence, Illusion 20, only 12 Hind Mi-24P modernized, and 5 Mi-8. So from the beginning, we saw only 32 aircraft deployed and around 1,500 different other troops, which was supposed to service and protect the base. Knowing that the terrain is very hostile and some unidentified aircraft can attack the base, and feeling its vulnerability, Russian MOD also deployed a quite substantial number of air defense equipment. You know, from the beginning, it include Buk M2, Panzer, and after Russian Su-24 was shot down by Turkish Air Force, we also saw the deployment of S-400, and lately Ante 2005, also known as S-300V, was deployed in Tartus. So apart from this, certain number of ground equipment, including self-propelled howitzers Sta-B and main battle tanks T-90 were deployed to protect the base. And all these was done with the help of Russian airlift, mainly by Antonov 124 and Illusion 76, but also Russian Navy, and I will talk about it later, did a very good job extensively supplying the base during the whole operation. And now these phenomena, which is absolutely unique for Russian post-Soviet period and even Soviet period, now it calls Syrian Express, you know. So at December 2015 and January 2016, Russian air group was reinforced by sending extra 4 Sukhoi 34, 4 Sukhoi 30SM, and 4 Sukhoi 35. Apart from this, 4 new ground attack Mi-35 and up to 12 Mi-8 were deployed. Starting from December 2015, Russian Air Force started to support its group in Syria with the flight of AVAX from Russian territory, from base in Ossetia, Mozdok, which did several missions, and also 2 newly constructed Tupolev 214R reconnaissance intelligence aircraft was sent for temporary missions and used for reconnaissance missions. In March 2016, President Putin announced the partial withdrawal of Russian air forces from Syria. And we know that 12 Su-25 SM, 4 Su-24M, 4 bombers Su-34, 2 Mi-24 and 3 of 4 Mi-35 were returned to Russia. But in fact, de facto, it was a kind of rotation because at the same time, Russian Air Force deployed new ground attack helicopters Mi-28 and K-52 to Khmeimim Air Force Base. The total number of helicopters by that time achieved 24 machines. These helicopters were extensively used in support of Assad and Iranian troops on the ground, but it was not enough. And starting from June 2016, we saw that several Su-25 SM and Su-24M were sent back to Syria. The interesting phenomena, which is not very often known in the West, that this is not the kind of elite pilots which were deployed either from the beginning or at certain crucial time of the campaign, but it was regular pilots from all over Russia which was deployed for several months and sometimes weeks on a rotational basis. That's why Russia is using this unique opportunity to train its air crews, train its pilots, and according to certain estimations, already more than half of Russian pilots, at least when we're speaking about army aviation and frontline aviation, were already deployed to Syria. The same 1/4 of Russian artillery specialists also were deployed on a rotational basis to use this opportunity to train. And in fact, recently, President Putin, in his intervention at MOD, also said that we are using this operation as a great big test site and test field for Russian Air Force and some other troops. So, for now, January 2017, we have 16 Su-24, 12 Su-25, 4 Su-34, 4 Su-30SM, and 4 Su-35S deployed at Khmeimim Air Force Base. So now we have roughly up to 40 aircraft. Apart from this, during the last 7-8 months, the Russian ground component increased, and now it's roughly 3,000 men, including the battalion of military police, mainly composed of ethnic Chechens, which were sent there, and also heavy MRLS like TOS M1 Buratino and Smerch were deployed to reinforce Russian group. Apart from these equipment, we know that battery, 2 launching machines, 2 TEL machines of Iskander were deployed in Khmeimim, and also Bastion coastal missiles. They are based in Tartus, to protect the port. We all know that the high operational tempo which Russians showed during this campaign was absolutely without precedent. And the number of losses, so official account now is 24 servicemen died. Knowing that information appears about some losses later, we can estimate the losses around 50 men. All these losses doesn't count the members of crew which died in air crash in Sochi. That's why if we count them, including the 64 men of Alexandrov band, these figures will goes up. So as for number of sorties, they were quite high. I think the official figures which Russian authorities releases are correct, but under the condition that this is not all combat missions. It's including training sorties, it's including sorties which were aborted for some technical reason. I think it's also including observation missions, but I think that number of sorties which Russians claim, they are more or less correct. Apart from Air Force, we know that Russian Navy also participate, and on the 7th of October, it was coincide with birthday of President Putin. The first launch of Caliber cruise missiles happened from Caspian Sea. We know that in general, their use of cruise missiles, especially Caliber, were considered very successful. That's why now we see what I told at the beginning, calibrization of Russian Navy. Their next state armament program will envisage the construction of new type of missile boats, yeah, Karakut, with Caliber. And they say that the plants which involved in construction of Calibers, they are working nowadays 3 shifts, you know, like 8 hours, trying to replenish the stock of Calibers. Apart from Calibers from surface ships, which were launched from Caspian Sea, we know that in 2016, Russian Kilo-class submarine also launched Calibers successfully from Black Sea. Russian long-range aviation also participated extensively in the campaign, starting from November 2015, including the missions of Tupolev 160, Tupolev 95 MS, and Tupolev 22 M3. All of them was using newly built conventional cruise missiles Ha-101 and retrofitted Ha-555 with a conventional warhead and including the regular dump bombs. I think that the ratio between precision-guided weapons and dump bombs is more or less the same as Americans used during the Desert Storm 25 years ago. It also gives us a nice picture that despite the success, very high and successful operational tempo, Russian Air Force is still lagging behind almost 2 decades with the majority of Western developed air forces. And when we are doing this statement, it's not only concerning the United States, but also such a relatively small but mean and lean air forces like Norwegian, Danish, Dutch ones. But as some people joking in Russia, these 15, 16-month operation helped us to keep up. And now with all this experience, we're already at the level which United States and their allies had during the operation against Yugoslavia. So this year, something, you know, like gave us the possibility to come closer, which took 10 years in the peacetime for Western Air Forces. All these, what was said by me was not be possible if would be not very successful and extensive use of Russian Navy, because the main supply came by sea. According to Turkish observers, which there is a group of ship porters on Bosporus Strait, sometimes at the peak of Russian replenishment of the supplies, every second day there was a ship going either one or another way from Bosporus. During the meeting of Public Advisory Board, Public Council of Russian MOD, and I'm a member, I witnessed it, Minister Sergei Shoigu told that at their average, we supply 1,000 tons per day, and up to 1,500 tons at the peak. I think it's all including all means, including airlift. But this use of Russian Navy is extremely successful, and without almost a major accident, at least they are not known for the public. You know, we don't see any ship which lost power. So the use of all these ships was very extensive. But every success has a price. And when we count which ships were used, apart from old-fashioned landing ships constructed, by the way, in Soviet Poland, you know, the majority of these ships are more than 25 years old, and the cargo ships which were bought at the beginning of 2015 on the commercial market, Russian Naval Command almost mobilized all possible units of Russian ships, including, for example, such an exotic ship as Yauza, which was placed basically by Novaya Zemlya to assist the nuclear waste, you know, disposal. So, like, even the ships which were not tailored at the beginning for transportation were attracted. And I think next armament program will be largely concentrated on transport capacities, not very much landing capacities, but transport capacities of Russian Navy, because I think soon the majority of these aircrafts will be docking because of their not only power machines, but all of the machines will need a major overhaul, repairing, or even replacement. Yesterday, I've read the piece how Fox News evaluated the use of aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov in Mediterranean. If we'll get rid of some pejorative connotation, in fact, all facts are correct. You know, we are still having kind of trial and error process with our carrier aviation, and the loss of 2 aircraft showed how not very much experienced the deck crews. And I think despite the loss of 2 aircrafts and using the majority of these ships from Khmeimim Air Base, in general, it was very positive experience. I think many lessons were learned, and apart from training missions, it was the first combat deployment of Kuznetsov ever. That's why, even if it looked not that nice on the TV screens, yeah. For example, when there was a question why the smoke is so black, the popular legend claims that power station is very old, you know, and if you use it at the maximum capacity, yes, the vapor would be white, but it can damage the power machine. That's why they put it on a lower mode. That's why not all the fuel burns. That's why the picture is not that girly. MOD insisted on the fact that 420 combat missions were accomplished. Out of them, 117 at night. Up to 252 targets were hit. I think as far as the number of targets engaged, we are facing the same problems as France, Italy, and many others faced in Libya, when you have lack of targets. And in fact, the main problem for Russians now, it's not the number of aircrafts or sorties, but not enough information which targets you should engage. I know that at the beginning of the operations, Russians were collaborating with Israelis, but were not very much happy with the results of this collaboration. Now, apart from Russians, we're also using, from time to time, verifying it twice and thrice, Iranian data. So we need data, which targets to engage, which targets to attack. Yeah? So as for lessons, in fact, I think we can regroup them in two big categories, like lessons for Air Force and lessons for Navy. Because the ground forces, including the deployment of special operation forces, was limited, and there are not so much of open information. The only thing which we can now insist for sure, that after the previous defense minister, Anatoly Serdyukov, left office, Russian MOD almost lost interest in mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles. But knowing how well LMV Echo showed in Syria, and now spotters published the pictures of Typhoon Kamaz-built MRAPs, we can judge that Russian army is returning its interest towards mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles. I saw several pictures of damaged LMV Echoes. There were 2 or 3 of them damaged, roadside bombing, mine vehicle is almost totally destroyed, but every serviceman went out of the vehicle on its feet, So that's why the lessons for Army so far is not so obvious, but for Air Force, we think that Russians would be paying more and more attention on air mobility, because with current problem with the fleet of Antonov 124, the engines are made in Ukraine. We still have certain number of engines in stock. In the worst case, we can always address to commercial airliner Volga-Dnieper, but they also are facing the same problems with the replenishment of their supplies. I think soon the fleet of Antonov 126 Ruslans would be grounded, and it will not be that possible that quickly to deploy, for example, main battle tanks or air defense systems comparable to S-400. That's why how this problem would be solved, I don't know. But as for other type of aircraft, we all see how Russian Ministry of Industry, jointly with MOD, trying to speed up the program of Ilyushin 112, small transport aircraft, which is supposed to be used instead of Ukrainian designed and partially made in Ukraine Antonov 148. We know that there is an ambitious program of new versions, enhanced version of Ilyushin 76, which calls Ilyushin 476. Apart from air mobility, I already mentioned that Navy will be paying lots of attention of its landing and transport capabilities, I think including buying commercial off-the-shelf ships, and probably not even in Russia. I think also it was clear that all troops which can be used with a better than regular mobility would be developed. And it's not only about Special Operations Command or Marines or, let's say, airborners. I think even in the regular army would be created special units tailored for expeditionary operations. The the striking attack capabilities of Russian Air Force also would be reinforced. The main problem of this campaign that apart from dumb bombs, even the bombs with laser correction had its limits, you know. And if the bomb is 500 kilos, very often there is overkill, you know, and collateral damage. And since Russians doesn't have a small size miniature munition, now would be extra efforts done in this direction. And we have either limited or almost zero weapons which can engage small and moving targets. Sometimes we see the target, but we cannot hit it, you know. And I think also lessons, as for capabilities, drone capabilities, the most advanced and successful drones which were used, it was good, reliable, but already obsolete Searcher Mark II, which is constructed in Russia under the license in Yekaterinburg. But Israel has already informed us that they will not be able to supply us with the next batch because of their formal or informal red light from the United States. And now several companies, both privately run, like privately owned, like Kronstadt, or state-run, like Vega concern, are working on several different types of drones, including Mail and Hail, which will replenish this lacuna. On this high note, I will end up and would be happy to answer your questions, but it would be not honest from my side to say that the main lessons which we are learning now, they are not from Syria, although Syria is extremely important. The main lessons they are from Ukraine, yeah? And I a little bit elaborate about this in my article in Vedomosti newspaper, which calls Naša karta Afriki, our map of Africa, saying that Russia is paying very important attention on its eastern border, reinforcing its border, and Russian military leadership draw lots of lessons from Ukrainian, from the events in Donbass, including that the current Russian brigades, which were created under previous leadership of MOD, which supposed to be fully manned and fully ready, never became fully manned and fully ready. That's why they returned to the idea of divisions, where division became, in fact, a big reservoir to replenish the units which would be deployed. Basically, we're returning to the practice of 90s of tactical battalion or tactical regimental groups, you know, to have fully manned. The problem with mobilization, if you need to rotate troops, even with, so to speak, 1 million army, which never achieved 1 million level, I think at peak it achieved 900, now probably less. You need to have the components to replenish the forces, starting from some kind of National Guard type here, what they try to implement, and also have some mechanisms of mobilization of people. As we saw in Ukraine, these 5 waves of mobilization were not extremely successful, you know, and in case of need, the manpower is still a crucial point for Russian MOD. Another lesson which we think is drawn from Ukraine, that the current Soviet-designed hardware, including main battle tanks, APCs, infantry fighting vehicle, are extremely vulnerable to modern and even obsolete anti-tank, anti-armor weapon. Yeah. And even if crew is very successful and can have a passive and active defensive systems, tank and APC get up to 7-8 hits, and the vehicle is destroyed. That's why now Russia is developing the new family of Kurganets protected APCs, Armata main battle tanks, infantry fighting vehicle, and APCs Boomerang. Heavy, very protected, which would have probably no advantage vis-a-vis modern and prospective Western examples of the equipment, but obviously vis-a-vis all post-Soviet legacy which Russian neighbors had. I think this is absolutely obvious. Investment in radioelectronic warfare and in technical intelligence also would be done because the Russian stress on human intelligence showed that it's not always and sometimes not at all correct in giving you correct information. So thank you for being patient. Michael, I know that I abused my
You
time.
annexed a lot of my time.
Sorry for illegal annexation.
Thank you, Ruslan. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike to defend his time and space without actually infringing on the sovereign rights of our audience to later ask questions.
All right, look, Ruslan, as always, it was a great comprehensive presentation. I know people actually really probably here want to get to Q&A. So I'm going to give sort of very broad strokes and quickly my own impression and try to make it just slightly complementary to what you said on Syria, and I'll kind of break it up into a little bit of what I saw, sort of, the good, the bad, and the ugly of this intervention. So on the good side, Russian sustainment in terms of the operational role was really quite good, and we can talk about how much sortie generation there really was versus there wasn't. The numbers, the metadata, of course, as you said, is very easy to play with. But in terms of, if you kind of break it down and look at something else, which is how many number of flights per airframe they did on days of high-intensity operations, they were pretty good. They were quite comparable to our allies. In terms of, pulling Turkish cargo ships, it was a creative solution for the shortage in sea lift. I would say by 2016, the use of auxiliary ships versus old Russian LSDs drastically overtook in the Syrian Express the tonnage supply. And what it, I think, really shows to us is that without investing in the sea lift, which is a very expensive capability, which unless you plan to do a lot of away games like the United States, you really don't need, Russia could actually get by with cargo commercial transport as it showed, because this is basically the bulk means of supplying the operation now. And it shows that that you can surge this capacity. You don't have the capacity, you can surge it commercially pretty cheaply. And you can run a limited expeditionary operation that way. Most of the losses were amongst helicopters, which I think is pretty expected in this type of operation. I think what's unexpected is that nothing fell out of the sky, because all these Soviet workhorses of Su-25, Su-24.
I'm afraid that I will forget the general designer of Black Shark, Mikheyev, said, helicopter, it's not летательный аппарат.
Not a flying.
Not a flying vehicle.
Yeah.
This is the mechanism which man raped to fly. Yeah? And in fact, we in Russia call helicopter, it's not a aircraft, it's a brick with a ribbon. That's why I'm not surprised that helicopters fall down. In fact, they are split in two big categories: those who already crashed and those who would crash in the future.
Right. And I mean, as part of this operation, testing new platforms like Mi-28, K-52, never got to see that serious combat. On Mi-28, they found out exactly how many hours and how much time they could spend flying it before it just fell out of the sky of its own. And that was the experience they had. In terms of overall force presence, I think the best way to describe Russian operations, probably not just in Syria and Ukraine, which is a pulse presence, right? It's pretty flexible. Russia pursues a lean strategy. And there are a lot of advantages to it, but it's a surging of presence forward and a surging of presence back, right? You deploy capability, you withdraw capability as you need it. You use the operation to rotate units through. You make sure you don't get overly leveraged. So there's a real approach of sufficiency here. And you see throughout the Syrian operation, Russia deploying aircraft, helicopters, then withdrawing aircraft, replacing aircraft with some helicopters, scattering helicopters to forward operating bases, and playing with this force mixture, trying to keep it small. Sometimes the ground presence was a bit bigger, sometimes it was smaller, sometimes the Air Force presence was bigger, but you can see that pulsed is probably the best way to think about it. Ground forces, I mean, I think Russian special forces ultimately did play an important role in the fight. So did Russian private military contractors that were, like Wagner's group and others that were highlighted in the news. It's unclear what impact they had, but...
One thing, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're not done?
No. When we're speaking about Wagner Group, we should always remember that this is not the PMC
Right.
in the Western term of the world, you know? It's, from one point of view, it's a hybrid, I'm sorry. It's a PMC, it's acts, these people are not как под присягой there, but I have impression it's something like now Russian MOD have a short contract. If you wish to fight, you can contract, yeah? But when military psychology is like tested and you're basically not fit for service, but you still want to fight. If so, if you are kind of that type of nation with a previous background, you can engage there. So once again, it's my intellectual exercise, yeah, but I read this situation in that way, you know.
Yeah, well, yeah, on the issue of PMCs, I think that in terms of Russian combat losses in general operation, I agree with you that they're probably 50, somewhere between 50 and 100, and then the rest of them are amongst PMCs and various other people that went to fight, and either they volunteered to fight, or the money was good, or they wanted to fight, and the money was good. Those two incentives often come together, but we don't know what those casualties were. All right, so let me fast forward. This is the good. So the end point on the good is the logistics were good, much better than you thought they would be. Right? And logistics is that's the key of expeditionary operations. That's really the core of it. The bad. Well, there's obviously a lot for the bad. That's a pretty long list, but let's say this, as we agreed. Very few precision-guided munitions used, and those precision-guided munitions that were used were not very precise. Right? There's a lot of tinkering to be done there. Targeting pods, you know, Russian Air Force continues to dream someday they will enter 21st century. They get targeting pods. You know, this Gefest SVP-24 and 22 bombing system. Okay, it's obviously is a much bigger improvement than not having it, but all that being said, Syria, despite kind of popularized media accounts, actually did have a prevalence of man-pads. That's how the Syrian Air Force lost the Syrian Air Force, right? So the Russian Air Force was forced to fly at medium altitude, and that's just a basic fact that once you get above a certain altitude, you have such a dispersion rate of unguided bombs that SVP-24 can't save you, okay? It can't do much for you. So what happens is you're doing a lot of bombing, but you're hitting a lot of sand, right? The efficacy of your bombing campaign drops down, and the system makes things better, but it really improves things at a lower altitude, which Russia couldn't fly at to avoid because of avoiding losses. Most drone footage, as you said, I mean, these are ultimately Israeli license-produced drones. Russian medium-sized drones only really start flight testing, this summer. So we still have quite a long way to go from what Russia's deploying a lot of different drone systems across its force. Most of them are smaller, short-range or disposable drones. Medium drones are in the pipeline, in the works. Some are in design stage, some are in flight testing stage, but we can tell that there's still some time away from actually having their own capability here. You know, the ugly. Well, there's a bit here. Obviously, the worst part was naval aviation. You know, unfortunately, Admiral Kuznetsov killed the most Russian plane in this intervention, more than Turkey, and Turkey was a contender. So, and you said two, but I think one aircraft fell out of operation on the way down when it was doing flight operations off Norway. So I think probably 2 aircraft lost, but in terms of aircraft that fell out of service, we might go up to 3 or 4. Yeah, naval aviation still has a very long way to go. That's very clear. Another part of it is you could clearly see, you know, with this M54 FAB-500 bomb, the loading on Su-33. I think M54 means it was adopted 1954 year of service. Yeah, something along those lines. So you could see that in terms of naval aviation, there weren't just problems on board the Kuznetsov, which is to be expected. That's a very troublesome and notoriously unlucky ship. There are also just basic problems, which is your, you know, 50s unguided bombs that you're loading onto aircraft. You know, or a couple of things I'd say probably, you know, during the episode with Turkey, Russian combat search and rescue did not come off looking all that well. When the 2 pilots were down, that did not a successful mission. And on long-range aviation, I think long-range aviation in terms of firing standoff guided munitions did quite well, but these like Tu-22 bomb runs at 25% payload capacity from Mozdok, dropping FAB-250 completely unguided bombs. This is just like 1950-style bombing. This is, of course, looked very impressive on TV, but the reality, the actual impact on the ground, I think, was pretty minimal. And the last part is, yeah, Russia's LST's fleet, right? Landing ship tank fleet. So the youngest is 25, and the oldest is 50 this year as a commemorative event, right? This is their age range. And that's pretty problematic. I mean, they're still serviceable, they still perform, but in terms of the actual seaworthy landing fleet, they're getting pretty old. Questions I have, and you touched on this at the end, I think one of the most important questions was, how much of this air campaign was really information-driven? How was the Russian Air Force putting together strike packages? Where did the intelligence come from? Did it come from Syrian Iranian intelligence? Did it come from some of their own reconnaissance? What percentage of the time did the Russian Air Force actually know what it was hitting? And that is debatable. I think that's highly debatable to me from what I saw. So
one more, not to forget, because you know, despite having ODKB SSTO, yeah, we have almost zero experience. We had almost zero experience working with the allies. You know, now even if these allies are not that reliable as Armenia or Belarus, we got absolutely invaluable, absolutely outstanding experience working not only with Syrian army, but also with Iranians, and not only with Quds, but also with Hezbollah, also with other militias, and also with, no, for you probably Hezbollah, it's a pejorative connotation. For me, Hezbollah is like Matryoshka, you know? There is a combat, there is a social, like Salvation Army, you know? For you, Hezbollah is bad, you know? For some people, Hezbollah, they are praying it, you know? Nothing to be proud, nothing to be ashamed, you know? United States also have an experience to working together with such people, you know, I even don't dare to mention them, you know, especially at night, you know, children will not sleep.
don't digress.
Yeah, and even Iraqis, you know, and when you cooperate with people who are deep-rooted in Soviet legacy, who are using Russian language either as a lingua franca or they are bilingual, and here, all different, culture different, language different, no experience. And I think this 15 months, even if the results of this cooperation is mixed, I think it's absolutely unique thing, which we probably had in Afghanistan a little bit with locals, but also within 25 years, I think there is almost no officers in Russian armed forces who had this experience. Sorry.
Sorry. I mean, this is actually one of my questions, and we'll let Mike finish, and then we'll. No, but I'm gonna, since you're answering it anyway, and then we'll turn back to Mike, and then we'll go back to the audience. No, I mean, what do we know about how the cooperation works?
I don't have a pen to take notes, that's why I was afraid that I will forget.
What do we know about how the cooperation works? I mean, what do we know about how targeting packages are passed over? What do we know about coordination on the ground? How did they overcome language difficulty? I mean, and this is something I've been very interested in because the United States has had trouble with this, and it's had trouble with this with people who speak excellent English and operate the same equipment. So, I mean, are there things we know about this? Is there?
I mean, from watching the campaign, look, getting above the tactical level, but at the way the operation was run, the campaign proceeded, there were clearly areas of alignment and pretty obvious areas of differences that started to emerge at Palmyra. And that was very clear, where Syria and Iran started having some different operational objectives from Russia. I mean, my view is that, look, any campaign like this with allies, the experience is always very mixed, right? That's the joy of working with allies. And I agree with Ruslan that for Russia, this is no doubt a unique experience in the last at least 25, 30 years. But overall, I think Russia, Iran, Syria have managed to stay in this coalition. There were some very prominent public moments that are almost embarrassing, like this thing with Iran a couple of months ago. We remember over Hamadan Air Base. This is a great.
It's Iranian,
yeah. Well, yeah, right. So, so there's. I mean, that was a more public episode, but I think in terms of the actual campaign, probably more obvious differences, from my perspective, emerged around February, March, where It was clear to Russia that on the one hand, they're very successful shaping facts on the ground, and they were doing quite well. But on the other hand, the state of Syrian forces may have been a little bit misrepresented to them early on, and they intervened kind of late, and the Syrian army had really degraded to a pretty low level, not much holding it together as a real army. And then there were some differences as to what you want to fight for, which is how you're actually going to shape the campaign. Do you want to fight for cities? Do you want to spend 7, 8 months fighting over Aleppo? Or do you want to pursue other objectives? Do you want to lock in gains politically with a deal with the United States? I've written about some of these, War on the Rocks, other places. So these, to me, it was obvious that the objectives differed, and that became apparent starting in March. No, let's go to Q&A. This is the best part.
All right. Thanks. So I thought that was great. Before I do turn to the audience, I have one more question that I want to raise, which is, what do you see, in terms of what we see Russia learning, what are they learning it for? As you kind of watch Russia invest in the calibrization of the fleet, as you watch Russia take lessons from both special forces operations and air operations, from the deployment of the Kuznetsov, what do you think they expect to be doing with all of this? What sorts of wars do you think they expect to be fighting?
Well, there is a short and long answer. Short one, I don't know.
Let me speculate.
The long one, everybody got excited and paranoid when Russia returned Crimea home. For me, return of Crimea home was the return to normal. So the last 20, let's say from the collapse of Soviet Union until the return of Crimea, how to put it politically correct? It was macro-historical deviation, Russia wanted to be friend of the West. And for me, for example, I always had very high opinion about Robert Gates until I read his memoirs, And in memoirs, I understand that it's extremely mean and not intelligent person, because when he's writing and mocking at Putin and at Munich, saying something like Putin is begging, humiliating him. And when he's describing how in '92 he did his lone march of head of CIA, of his head of CIA on Red Square, like it was my personal parade, I think in 2007 in Munich was a cry of soul of Putin. We wanted to become your Poland. We wanted to be, you remember this Putin's 2001 phrase, Russia member of NATO, why not? Why not? Putin thought that Yeltsin was correct as far as the target, but he was not intelligent and smart. Me, I'm smart, and my people are smart. We would be basically a partner of the West, That's why this 9/11, Afghan transit, by 2007, was a terrible frustration, that West and United States...
I think this is the very long answer.
No. It's extremely important because before 2014, there was no Russian troops by Crimea border. There was no idea to fight West, Under Serdyukov, Kaliningrad became de facto demilitarized, was very limited number of troops. And now we see all return back to our macro-historical norm. That's why I think now Russia is preparing to have all types of wars. With Japan for Kuril Islands, with China. Unfortunately, now it's a nightmare of General Gerasimov, or who will take his chair. Now we are preparing to fight our neighbors, United States. That's why development of the new intercontinental ballistic missiles. That's why, but short answer, I don't know. If you prefer short answer, take it, Dr. Oleka.
Okay. Yes, you want to respond, Mike?
Well, I mean, I like to respond short answer, but...
Short answer? Small is beautiful.
Yeah, you might have done better with a short answer. I think in terms of contingencies, probably the ranking order today for Russia is 1, Ukraine, a larger second war in Ukraine over the medium to long term. 2, still a conflict that involves NATO, and the proximate source of that conflict would be Belarus. I know the answer in Washington, D.C. is always the Baltics, but it's not for Russia, it's Belarus. 3, a contingency in Russia's near abroad, either in the Caucasus or Central Asia. And I still think that best military leadership in Russia is always through Central Military District, and Central Military District commanders grow up into the General Staff, and they end up running the Syria operation, and they end up becoming Chief of General Staff in Russia. And it's very disappointing to people who are very excited about Western Military District, but that's typically not where the best Russian military leadership is, and it tells us a lot. And of course, there's the Pacific contingencies of, maybe fight United States and Japan and the Pacific and some defensive conflict. But realistically, Ruslan, I think Russia always looks to the Pacific as the war will always be in Europe, and it may horizontally escalate at some point to the Pacific, but the proximate course of, cause of conflict will never be there.
Probably answer in a collateral way. At CAST, since we're kind of commercial hybrid, we study very particular things, but there is one country which of crucial interest for us. It's a country called Algeria, And let's say 10 years ago, how was the threat perception in Algeria? Islamist insurgency, first. Then blank place, on 4th place, Morocco, And then nothing. What now for them the pyramid of threats? West, NATO, France, because they are afraid that they will come as they came to Syria to correct the identity of militaries. That's why having now almost zero money, they keep contracting all these heavy platforms. So West, then a little bit of Islamists, and no Morocco, Perception matters, and even if these perceptions are misperceptions, I'm sorry.
Okay, it's y'all's turn. A few ground rules before we begin. First, I'm going to take 3 questions at a time and ask. The ground rules apply to Ruslan and Mike also, who should stop giggling in the corner. There's a camera on y'all, so yeah. At least one, possibly more, several microphones. I'm going to take 3 questions at a time. I do ask that everyone identify themselves and phrase their question as a question. Despite the precedent that has already set, I do ask that you refrain from insulting anybody. No personal insults. And I do ask that you be on topic. Let's not veer into things that aren't about the Russian military and its campaigns. Okay, having said that, we've got a hand in the back over there for the first batch of 3.
Stanley Kober. At his press conference in December, shortly after the murder of the Russian ambassador in Turkey, Putin said something that has been neglected, which I think really bears on this issue. He said he was skeptical that the aircraft, I'm quoting from the press conference, was downed without the order of Turkey's top leadership. But he says, I am beginning to change my mind. The infiltration of Turkey's government agencies, including law enforcement and the army, by destructive elements is certainly deep. We see that this is a fact. This is taking place. If Turkey's security agencies are being infiltrated by these extremist elements, what are the implications for Russia? What are the implications for us?
Okay, next question. Right over there.
Alexander Meligishvili, IHS Market. Thank you very much for your remarks, very informative. I have a kind of a 2-part question that is directly related to Russian involvement in Syria. I want to backtrack a little bit and hear your view on what happened actually with regard to the use of the Hamadan base in Iran. There are several different versions of it, and one of the prevailing versions is that it was very badly mishandled by the Russian mainstream media. I'm referring to the 3 TV segments that were basically later on conveyed to the supreme leader and created a great deal of backlash in Tehran. So that's one. And the second, I'm really curious to hear your view about the efficiency of the operation of the quadrilateral center in Baghdad, which was established sometime in late 2015, please correct me if I'm wrong, where you have Russia, Syria, Iraq, and Iran essentially engaged in the exchange of the military and other information. Thank you very much.
Take one more. And Beck, let's just finish the back row of questions.
Hi, Richard White, Hudson Institute. Just a question about military coordination with Israel. What was the extent to which possible deconfliction or at least early warning was established to prevent any incidents?
Okay. None of these questions in the area of my expertise. That's why I can answer short, I don't know, or long. Which answer you prefer? Short? Okay, I don't know. So seriously, as for Turkey, you know, basically there are 2 points of view on Turkey, especially when failed coup happened. You know, some observers said, "Oh, cool, Turkey now is in a big mess, and it's out of geopolitical game." I simplify to extreme. There was another point of view. Imagine if Turkey became weak, it's probably even worse for Russia. Because if until recent times certain parliamentarians could stood up, certain journalists could say, why we're giving refuge to the extremists from post-Soviet space, you know? We should not do it. So in general, so weaker Turkey is not that good for Russia. Since I'm not a professional Turkologist, I think that these more or less 2 points of view is fighting in Russia, both in general, among general people, and whether we are interested to have a strong Turkey or basically Turkey. I don't know whether you're satisfied with this pseudo-analysis, but I have no answer. Yeah? As for Iran Hamadan, I think it was only a pretext for Iranians. I always joke that United States and its allies living in 21st century. Russia is living at the end of 20th century, but Iranians are living in 17th century, you know? So their mentality is different, and we need a new Ruth Benedict, which will write Sword and Chrysanthemum about Iranians to understand their nature, you know? It's all internal stuff. Pasdaran for this, MFA for this, MOD for this, you know? It's like internal fight of the serpents in some cage, you know? And remember, then there was the first protests, so to speak, aborted color revolution. One of the slogans was like, Russians go home, because there were rumors that Russians sent Spetsnaz to support Iranian leadership against democratic protesters, you know? There is a big mess in Iranian heads. I think they are basically stupid and arrogant as we Soviets were at the end of 80s. Sorry for being non-PC. As for coordination,
maybe we should also try not to insult countries.
As for coordination with Israel, there is an extensive dialogue, and the Russians are not hiding this, you know. There is a group of Russian liaison officers apart from defense attaché office in Israel, you know. What are the practical fruits? I know that some intel information was used, which was given by Israelis. But knowing that our attitudes towards Iranians and towards Hezbollah is slightly different from Israeli ones, I would use this intel information with a grain of salt, you know. I would use. As Russian MOD does, I don't know. We recently compiled a book about Russians in Syria and in Syria in general. One of the reasons why we omitted a chapter about Iranians and Israelis because there is a lack of reliable data. We know that there is something going on, you know. But what? Unfortunately, you cannot do analysis only on rumors and allegations. Sorry for not persistent and consistent answers.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, sure. On the Turkey question, unfortunately, I don't. It's a good question, but I just don't know. on what happened between Russians and Iranians on Hamadan Air Base. Principally, I agree with Ruslan. The big problem is that Iranians kind of living at least in the previous century. So clearly there were big political problems with Russia using the air base. And in fact, a lot of the footage Russia had flown that week was clearly old file footage. It was not the file footage of those flights. But Iranians, or at least some elements of Iranian bureaucracy, thought that this would somehow be kept quiet, and then they're not aware that there's satellites, up ever since some point in the 1960s, and they don't know that, Jane's Defense will order from Airbus commercial satellite weekly imaging of Iranian air bases. And 1 week it'll be empty, and then the next week it'll be lots of Russian Tu-22s on it that anyone can see, and they do this all the time. So it had not occurred to the Iranians that it is physically impossible for Russia to keep their cooperation secret for more than like 7-8 days, just in the century, right? It seems to be that there's just a big disconnect there in terms of modernity. Efficiency of Baghdad Center, I don't know. It had a great forcing political function early on at the beginning of the intervention to say, hey, we have a coalition, we have a fusion center of intelligence, here's our sort of, team, everybody's on board. So the politics of it early on played quite well. The actual efficacy of it, whether anything exchanged there was of utility, no idea. To Richard's question on coordination with Israel, well, it seems that from watching the last year and a half that it's not bad. Russians have the opportunity to fly and they can skirt Israeli airspace and it's not a big deal. And Israelis seem to have the ability to bomb in certain areas inside Syria. And these things are clearly coordinated since, as you know, Russian air defense system and Russian combat air patrols are up there. So obviously these things either coordinated or agreed they're shared principle. I think from Israel's perspective, probably Russia's the best neighbor it's had in the Middle East in a very long time. In terms of given the neighborhood, the coordination's great, but more on sort of alignment of political interests. I think the premise for Israeli cooperation with Russia is that none of these defensive systems that Russia's introduced into theater will be left in theater in the hands of people that are either Hezbollah or are friends of Hezbollah, could pass on to Hezbollah. Not so much worried about the sophisticated things. I mean, you understand S-300 is not like iPod. You cannot give it to Hezbollah and then they're going to use it. That doesn't work that way. It's like a spaceship to transfer to an insurgency organization. But there's a lot of other things that are much easier to use that you could do. And I think as long as everybody follows these sort of core rules of their arrangement, that they're fairly happy.
All right, let's take another batch. Let's go up front now. Please wait for the microphone.
David Fishman, George Mason University. The tone and tenor of your interaction up on the podium today strikes me as somewhat different than the tone of interaction of the confirmation hearings of President-elect Trump's nominees for Secretary of Defense and State Department. I wonder if you'd care to comment on that. How
would they comment on
I'm
that?
not U.S. citizen, How can I comment on your internal stuff?
I'm not sure I understand what your question is.
One picks up a lesser level of mutual hostility, perhaps, would be the way. Maybe does that make it a little more precise?
Well, we're military experts. It's a pretty small field, and we've known each other for many years because it's a pretty small field. I mean, in terms of Russian military analysts, you can get them all to one dinner party in the United States because it's such a tiny group. So, yeah. small group, yeah.
It's been done.
Yeah.
So it means how dirty Russian dares to stay here on the podium and share with the U.S. audience. I understand you correctly.
I think what he's asking is, why are we not talking about how much we hate each other?
Maybe we can discuss that afterwards. No, my question was, one of the actors that you guys didn't mention was the Kurds. And I was wondering if you could say something about the nature of the Russian military and political, potentially, interactions with the Kurds and how it's been shifted by the kind of rapprochement between Russia and Turkey.
Let's take another. Let's go up front.
Ryan Hellerstedt, U.S. Army War College. Thanks for being here. I appreciate your candor. Question I have is, does the Russian military see its operations in Syria as counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, or an expeditionary operation, or both? And with the common interest that the United States and the Russian military has in Syria, have the operations in Syria helped or hurt the larger strategic relationship between the United States and Russia, specifically with the military?
Okay,
Thank
and
you.
let's do one more. Just if you can pass the microphone to.
Irv Chapman for Michael Kaufman. You tossed off the issue of whether the Baltics are in the line of sight, and we've heard a great deal about how the Russians might proceed there based on the Ukraine example. But Belarus, as you said, has had almost no attention. What scenario do you foresee there in Belarus?
Thank you for addressing question about Belarus to my friend, because I have zero knowledge and that obviously cannot. So as for Kurds, once again, it's not even an information, it's just kind of something in there how I feel it, that Kurds, as you know, Barzani, Talabani, and one is teamed up, I don't know, with Turks, Israelis, so basically we will never be there that influential, you know. They have other patterns and other friends. But it would be nice to influence them somehow. That's why Russia also participated in these grants with weapons, probably some pseudo-instructors, but I don't think that you need an instructor, as Americans said, to Yavoriv test site to teach Ukrainians how to use Kalashnikov assault rifle. So probably there are some liaison officers, but my opinion that we are trying to be present, we are trying to influence, you know, but I don't think that our influence on Kurds in general, no matter which group, even affiliated with PKK, is strong enough. But once again, don't know. As for Russian operation in Syria, whether it's intervention, you know, our military science or military art, operational art, degraded the last 25 years. That's why sometimes we simply do it, you know. It's like when I created CAST, I first thought that it would be NGO, then I thought it would be think tank, now it's for profit, it's basically a company which sells analytics for people, you know. I never had a strategy, you know, I simply worked in the field which I liked. The same, I think, there was no someone who is drawing before we went where what type of operation would be. Later on, people like you and me will invent labels for all these operations. Mm-hmm. As for whether it's good or bad, if we painted black and white, I think it's bad for Russian-US relations. If it would have turned in a after Paris attacks, in a joint real coalition, as we used to fight shoulder to shoulder with Nazis, you know, but we were not even that close, you know. That's why I think on this particular case, we managed to return Americans to negotiation table, but somehow to team up with them, we gambled and we lost. If we'll shorten, you know, like I can talk for hours about it.
Okay, let's see. On the Kurds, I mean, I think the Kurds for Russia, as they have been for others, became a chip in this game, especially when Turkey shot down the Russian Su-24. Russia started saying, well, let's see, maybe we'll arm the Kurds, maybe we'll give them some political recognition, maybe we'll play with them, understanding that the Kurds are Turkey's #1 priority and interest in Syria, the only thing that they were more interested in seeing than seeing Assad fall. And that maybe have had some impact, maybe not, but I don't think Russia was ever serious about the Kurds. It was just a chip that they wanted to play with Turkey during that particular moment. And maybe they were quite successful at it, I don't know. But I think that the Russian approach to this conflict always came from the perspective that they overall had a long-term understanding with Turkey that they did not want to see Kurds create some kind of independent state on Turkish borders, and that they were largely on the same page when it came to these existential interests of the Turks. Does Russia see this as an operation, as a counterterrorism quint operation or expeditionary? Well, I mean, both. It's it's billed as an expeditionary counterterrorism operation, right? In terms of, I think, Russian perspectives, yeah, it's a counterterrorism operation. Its principal objective is to prevent regime change and overthrow of Assad. It's a project designed not at nation building, but restoration of the regime's control, at least over some part of Syria, a rump Syrian state. And it's principally expeditionary. I think the most important thing for Russia is not what it is, but whether or not it's successful. And so far, at fairly low cost, they've done a pretty decent job at changing facts on the ground. And I think it's been principally very bad for U.S.-Russia relations. If you've been in D.C. the last year and a half, you've seen sort of the self-immolation that's been going on, especially the last couple months during the fall of Aleppo. That has not been positive, right, at all. I don't know what Russia had hoped it would achieve in terms of politics. Ruslan got into that a bit. I won't, but clearly that did not happen in the last 2 years. And the question on Belarus. So, I mean, I wasn't sort of flippantly discarding Baltics. I was just saying that for us, Baltics are sort of an obvious priority. That's our proximate likeliest cause of conflict with Russia on NATO's eastern flank. So that's what we focus about. But the question is, what do the Russians talk about in terms of their contingencies? And Belarus, when they think about what is the likely cause of a conflict between us and NATO, probably Belarus is their number one hypothetical that they get into. It's the question of, what do you war game, right? And I think their perspective is that the biggest fear is, of course, Belarus is a core interest for Russia, just like Ukraine, perhaps more so than Ukraine, where they want to retain influence. And their concern is, one, political instability in Belarus that manifests itself and may lead them to intervene either at the invitation of Belarusian authorities or not at the invitation of Belarusian authorities. I think one of those two scenarios for a fact would play out. And they see as a possibility that maybe NATO might want to intervene too, and that's where they prepared to fight. And that's, if you look at a lot of Russian exercises, even the most latest strategic operational exercise, had a component where they weren't basically in Belarus telling NATO peacekeepers, surrender, you're here under false premises, in Belarus to join exercise. I mean, but that's not the first time they've done this. They do a lot of these. And so I think for Russia, a big contingency is, one, how do we intervene in Belarus in case there's political turmoil and we need to assert influence and secure our interests there? And two, what if NATO or the United States has an interest to decide to play for this? If you look at structural changes to Russian force posture, we know about major divisions and brigades returning to Ukrainian borders, bringing Ukraine really from the battle grouping in Crimea all around the southern military district, the western military district, but right up to the border between Ukraine and Belarus. And that division that's going there will likely have a dual role. One is obviously as a northern strike force for Ukraine, but the other one is to cut across Belarus if need be. They'll be close, very close to it. So I think that's the only one of the new divisions that's proximate enough that it'll be able to affect both contingencies.
Let's take one more round of questions. Yep. Please do wait for the microphone, yeah.
Bill Hill, National War College. You've alluded to it, but let me ask you both, if you could more specifically, I'd be interested in your assessment or evaluation of U.S.-Russia deconfliction, coordination, whatever you want to call it, in Syria over the last year or so.
Do we have anything else? Up front here?
Jong-Soo Kim, I'm a student from USC in LA. How will domestic pressure in Russia affect or has affected Russian military operations in the Middle East, or mostly Middle East, but I guess anywhere else too?
Can you reformulate?
He's asking. Is there one more? No? Then let's let Ruslan and Mike answer.
So, once again, Bill, I'm not a specialist, but I think Americans did a great job for deconfliction, Russians could perform better in the deconfliction, but also at a certain stage, probably the talk was they're meat eaters, but the actions were vegetarian. I mean, like, basically everybody understand to what consequences, It can, if US aircraft shot down by Russians, probably would be no nuclear attack, but it would be not good, Let's put it like this. That's why I think if I would give marks, I would give A++ for Americans and A- for Russians, under current climate, with current paranoia and mistrust, it was very good. And I think there was a serviceman in uniform, he left, but I would have said, good job, thank you very much for preserving world peace. As for public opinion, public opinion follows, and we see people are still supportive, probably not that supportive as they used to be 15 months ago, but since war is not very costly in terms of lives, and also in terms of this, it's basically cost us several snap inspections, The current political and military leadership in Russia adopted this kind of technology of cheap wars, It's not like Afghanistan where you really was bleeding, That's why when Russians intervened in Syria, I remember some articles here entitled, "Let Putin Bleed." If Americans will not directly intervene, if the current future administration will be that moderate as Obama one, not sending manpads, we can sustain at least several 18 or probably 24 months. But it's my kind of vision. I don't know what people think in Kremlin.
Mike?
Deconfliction, yeah, I think the United States did very well. This is a priority, and I agree with much of what Ruslan said. I probably have slightly different evaluation, not just based on recent reporting, but in general, I don't think Russia did nearly as well as deconfliction, in part not because they were bad at it, but because they wanted to use this as a forcing function at several points of negotiations and tensions with the United States in Syria. And they would intentionally not only not deconflict operations, but do very, very naughty, dangerous things in order to force conversations. And in order to increase pressure, and I honestly think that at times that actually worked. If you remember the bombing of a base just across from Jordan's border back in early summer, right? That I think was several strikes during the course of one day, that was not sort of an error in deconfliction or a misunderstanding of what the thing was and what was going on. That was very intentional, was done for a purpose. So in this respect, I'm not sure how I would grade it, because I would say deconfliction worked, and when it didn't work, it a lot of times did not work intentionally, so that also worked for Russia.
We have still very limited information about real Russian-US negotiations on Syria. For example, for me, it was always a big question whether Americans really knew about Russian deployment or it was a kind of surprise, I spent almost a year knowing that, no, it was not a surprise, Neither Russians nor American administration denies, but Russians consult with current administration and basically talked and informed them about their operation. But under current political climate, for Ash Carter and his people, and I think for White House, it was better to pretend that it was a surprise for us. That's why if we think that world is black and white, and on one side there are black people, on the other are white, no, it's not a cartoon. World is gray.
Okay, so with that bit of either fake news or new information having entered our discourse, I'm going to thank our panelists for a very engaging discussion, which I think has given us a lot to think about, and I want to thank the audience as well. But please do join me in thanking Ruslan and Michael.